Thank you for joining me today for today's Lunch with Lynn faculty webinar series. Today we're talking about discussions with Socrates, and I promise this will make sense in a little bit why I chose that title. But today's topic is specific for faculty teaching an online course or any course really that uses a discussion forum in a learning management system, and in our case here at SNU, Canvas. So let's first discuss the question, what is your role in discussions in the LMS in Canvas? So in an online course developed by the Center for Learning and Innovation, your discussion forum prompts are already created. You know, when you log in and you look at your discussions, you don't have to decide that week what you and students will discuss. That has already been decided for you with the course writer and the instructional designer for the course. So that part's done for you. If you are teaching an online course where you develop your own discussion prompts, that's a whole other training. So you can reach out to me for guidance there. I can provide guidance on the topic of writing effective discussion prompts, but today, let's just talk about your role in terms of engaging within discussion threads with your students. So what is your role? And if you aren't sure, let me know in the comments, and I invite you to unmute yourself and or share in the comments. So if you've been attending my webinars, this model of interaction will be very familiar to you. Interaction can equal engagement, which can equal retention and success. So in that formula, it all starts with offering students opportunities for interaction within the course. And in a face-to-face course, student-to-teacher interaction is natural. You're standing in front of the class, you're talking with students as they come and go, you're talking with students during discussion and during your class activities. But in an online environment that's 100% asynchronous, we need to be proactive in fostering that interaction by building in opportunities. And discussion forums are an activity where the student experiences all three types of interaction: student to student, student to content, and student to teacher. So you are unique. You have been hired because of your expertise in a particular subject matter area, and you can offer our students a unique learning experience. So this is your invitation to truly engage with your students in your online course. Instead of just seeing yourself as a facilitator, we want you to see yourself as an integral part of the learning community and the learning environment and the students' learning experience and in their interactions. So you probably already engage with students in discussions. I know I've been teaching online for a long time now, it seems, and I've always been active in discussion forums, but until I learned these specific strategies I'm going to share with you today, I felt a little like I was kind of fumbling through discussions because it's text. It's not a natural form of communication for us. So these strategies I'm sharing with you today will hopefully help you engage your students even more effectively. So here's one faculty member's story about discussions, and this is from a related blog post. And she said, "As I reviewed course evaluations after my first year of online teaching, an unexpected theme emerged. Several students mentioned they wish I had been a bigger part of their discussions, primarily so they would know if they were on the right track. I naively assumed my silence during group discussions would be taken as evidence by students that their discussions were right on target, but this was not the case at all. Students needed more reassurance, especially since I was asking them to take very big risks in terms of explaining their understanding of a content area that was often new and challenging for them." So, I have also taken this approach in the past where no news is good news. If I don't need to hop in and make correction, then students will take that as a sign that they're on the right path. But even from my own course evaluations, faculty evaluations, and from this story shared by this one faculty member, students do want to see us in there talking with them and engaging with them. But we need to keep in mind there needs to be a balance between being present in the discussion and dominating the discussion. So think of it the same way you might an in-class discussion. You need to give space and encouragement for students to speak up. They also want and need to hear from you chime in as an expert on the topic. So you might need to ask questions beyond what is offered in the prompt to help students dig deeper. You might need to provide some corrective feedback, and that's not always comfortable to do. It's not always comfortable to do in a face-to-face classroom, and it's not always comfortable to do in an online discussion where other students are seeing what you're saying to each student. But you might stop to highlight a really great comment that a student makes. And sometimes in the physical classroom, you give space for students to kind of hash something out and go down an unexpected path. And it's not just you doing all the talking, and it should be that way in the discussion forum as well. My biggest recommendation is to let the discussion start. So you've kind of started the discussion with the prompt, and then students are going to hop in throughout the week during those first 4 days to post their initial thoughts. Give that a little bit of time to happen before you then start coming in to reply to students. And I like to have other students start replying first, unless there's a situation I need to hop in right away and make some correction or some guidance. But, that's typically allowing students to start the discussion, and then you chime in as you're able to. That is really a good practice. So her recommendations from the blog post that I just shared, some 5 things that you can do. I believe it's 5, it might be 6. Cheer students on and let them know when they are on the right track. Highlight important points they've made during the discussion. Question students about their understanding, or ask them to clarify remarks they've made or expand on certain topics and ideas. Correct any misconceptions and misunderstandings. And this is really important, that we are looking, we don't let things go down the wrong path or incorrect information to be perpetuated within a discussion. We want to catch that right away. And the final one is provide direct instruction if students appear to be struggling to understand material. So going in behind them and adding some clarification and prompting them. So a couple of these have to do with asking questions, which we're going to get to in a little bit when we discuss Socrates. For now, I want to simply showcase some things that can help you. Before we go to my samples, I want you to keep in mind that students are eavesdropping on your conversations with other students, or we hope they are. We hope they are in there, not just posting their post and replying to their 2 peers and then leaving. We really want to encourage them to be in there reading posts, even if they're not replying to specific students, but to go ahead and read posts. And we really want to use this as an opportunity. So not only are you replying directly to one student, but you are hoping that the other students are reading your posts as well. Just like in a physical classroom, you may take time to discuss something aloud with one student, but everyone else is listening in and they're a part of that learning experience. So we want to encourage students to read our replies to other students. So knowing that students are listening in, so to speak, consider posting a course announcement, letting them know how you plan to engage in discussions. Just be right upfront with them. You can encourage them to read all of your replies, even if those replies are not directly to their posts. But be overt and direct, letting students know what you will be doing in discussion forums and why you are doing it. And if you let them know that they will benefit from reading your replies, even those not directly to them, they will be more likely to read those. So let me give a couple examples here. This is one of my own samples to cheer a student on. It's one of the easiest things to do, give kudos for something done well. And I like to do this with specific things such as formatting and clarity, and a student kind of going above and beyond by providing real life examples, or even on their replies to another student, if they really replied well, giving their own insights, playing devil's advocate, or asking questions of others. I like to point that out. So here's one example. I just said to the student, small note here for others to see also, thank you for using headings in your post. Seeing things in sections according to the discussion forum prompt helps us follow your thinking. And I know we all have our little things that we like to see in student work. And one of the things I really like to see, and I harp on it all term, is use headings in your writing so that the reader, I, and the other students can really see when you move from point to point. And those in forums, they don't necessarily need to be like APA specifically formatted headings, but I do push my students to think about the headings that they would use in a discussion to help us kind of follow their thinking. And I also let them know it's a great way to make sure you've hit on all of the areas of the prompt, because if you're missing something as a heading, you know you've probably not discussed it. So I just wanted to point that out. That's one way that I've cheered a student on. Here's a sample where a student post was not fully accurate. And this is a more difficult task. When a student misses the mark, how do we handle incorrect statements or examples? And we need to do that with kid gloves, just like we would in a face-to-face classroom, where we don't want to discourage the student, but we do need to correct them. So a strategy you likely use, we probably all do, is to affirm and then ask. So affirm something positive from the student post and then ask a question to direct the student. So this example is this particular student, they were to compare and contrast two different fields within instructional design. So instructional design technology and human performance technology, they're kind of cousins. They're very similar, but there are some differences. And he really wasn't going down that path of correctly identifying some of the differences. So I just I affirmed, I said, while they are both systematic models, ID does typically address learning needs. So I affirmed him. And then I'm going to ask him, I'm going to push him a little bit, take another look at the HPT literature. What kinds of issues does HPT typically address? Now, if this student does not come back in and answer me, that's one thing, but my post is there for other students to see as well. So they may, in their mind, think through those things as they're looking at my reply. So here's an example to highlight posts, and this is a simple formatting strategy that I use to highlight key phrases and add my own side comments. So here I can add context and correct statements and clarify content. So I like to use bold and burgundy as things that I want to highlight. So I'm pulling quotes out from the student's post and I'm adding them into the I'm kind of quoting them in my reply. So I quote them and I highlight and bold key phrases, and then I add brackets of my own kind of side comments that I add in there. So in this one in particular, the student said, in contrast to IDT, HPT focuses on a performance or behavior gap. I wanted to highlight that because that is correct. And it's a very important thing to know about ID and HPT. So it tends to investigate more in the environmental or organizational sources. That's also something I want students to pay attention to. And she says of a learning gap, and I put in brackets, I would change learning to performance. It's more of a performance gap. So I've affirmed her by highlighting something she said. I've offered a little bit of correction. Students are in here, and I do get replies from students saying, thank you for the manner in which you highlight key phrases from our work so that we know A, what's important, and B, what we've done well. So I do get a lot of comments back from students about the way that I handle this. Here's another example where I highlight points, and I do a little bit of direct instruction too. Again, this is information that would be helpful for all of my students to read, which is why I encourage them to go through and read not only the replies to their posts, but the replies that I make to all students. So in this particular example, I've highlighted points made using my formatting strategy, and I also offer some direct instruction in that bottom section that's highlighted. So I just added, let's remember that HPT looks at the root causes of the issues, what are factors that are causing the gaps, that are causing the problems, and I kind of go into that. That's something that I talk to my students about all term long in this particular course. They need to be looking at the root causes, so I wanted to point that out. And another sample of I highlight strong points and correct or add additional context. So in this particular area where you see it highlighted, I said, I've used my formatting, so bold and a different color, and then I have my brackets, and I said up to this point, this is an excellent summation. So I wanted students to see everything that's been set up to this point, awesome job. And then that last phrase she uses, with supplemental education, I said, and I would add here, with effective interventions to close the gaps between actual performance and desired performance. So I wanted her to be more specific in the language that she chose to use. It's not necessarily called supplemental education, and it's not always training or education. It could be something else. So it could be an intervention completely unrelated to training or education. So I wanted to make that difference because that is something students struggle with. So where does Socrates fit into all this? So from the other example of the faculty member story that I shared earlier, two of her recommendations were to, one, ask questions about their understanding or ask them to clarify remarks they've made or expand on certain ideas. And her other recommendation related to that is correct any misconceptions or misunderstandings. And Socratic questions can help us do that. So Socratic questions probe and challenge deeper critical thinking. And I included this quote directly because I think it's just a really powerful way to say this. Socrates used this method of questioning to encourage his students or people to question the things they were told and to look beyond the obvious. So I let students know that our classroom materials offer a perspective. They offer insight on particular topics, and it's their job to critically analyze that and decide, some things are just black and white, it's right or wrong. A lot of times in our discussion forum prompts, we want students to grapple with things that might be kind of confusing or could have one or two different perspectives that could be good. So these Socratic questions help us get students beyond the obvious. We want them to dig a little deeper. So I've included a QR code here. This takes you to one of our SNU faculty support site pages that offers these questions. So don't feel like you need to jot these down. They are available online. And so this QR code, you can scan it with your phone, with your camera app, and it should offer the web page to open there on your phone. So 6 Socratic question types. 1 is clarification, 2 is challenging assumptions, 3 is evidence and reasoning, 4 alternative viewpoints, 5 implications and consequences, and 6 challenging the question. And I'm going to give some samples of those. And again, this chart is on our website, on that page that I shared with you. And it's in a table format at the bottom of that page. So Socratic questions, when you want students to clarify, and the graph that I offer on that website page is a really great one to print out and just have near your computer. So when you're in there working with students and you're you're being present in discussion forums, this is a great chart to have beside you because it can help you think about what kinds of questions you want to ask or questions you should be asking. So you could say, what do you mean when you say X? Or could you explain that point further? Could you provide an example of it? Is there a different point of view? And this is challenging assumptions. Is there a different point of view? What assumptions are we making here? Are you saying that? And you're filling in the blank. And these are things we might naturally say in the classroom during in-class discussions. We're less likely to say things like this in a discussion forum unless we're being really purposeful in what we're doing. So that's why I offer these. The next one is evidence and reasoning. You can ask, can you provide an example that supports what you were saying? Can we validate that evidence? Do we have all the information we need? For alternative viewpoints, are there alternative viewpoints? Might someone see this differently than you're seeing it? How could someone else respond, and why would they respond that way? And implications and consequences. How would this affect someone? And what are the long-term implications of this? And for challenging the question, why do you think this was, or what do you think was important about this question? Or what would have been a better question to ask? Sometimes you can just ask, why do you think we asked you this question this week? That's a really good one to get them thinking more meta about the questions that we're asking. So here's an example from one of my own classes recently. I asked a question for clarification. So the student mentioned some things in the article, but didn't really go or mentioned things from the article that they read in his post, but he just kind of mentioned them and didn't go any further with it. And I wanted him to move forward a little bit in that thinking, specific to mentoring and networking for developing female leaders. So the question I asked, can you offer a bit more on this topic? What kind of mentoring and networking would you recommend for developing women leaders? And I offer him to use his own experience in the workplace or something specific from the article. So asking this, it will really help prompt him to think a bit deeper about it, rather than just saying, yeah, it's important to have mentoring and networking for developing female leaders. Well, why and what does that look like? How could you operationalize that? A question for clarification. So I affirmed the student by quoting her part of her post that was really good. She mentioned collecting a lot of data was part of the case study that they read. So my question back to her was, how will you work to collect the different types of data for your own project? So I'm asking her for application, but also clarification of what do you mean you need to collect the data? And I want to prompt her, what methods will you use to gather the data? Your answer here might help others working to collect a variety of data for their own projects. So they're working with a real life client. This is a graduate level course. And I want her to take what she's learned from that particular case study that week and apply that new information or new understanding of data collection to her own project. Challenging a question. This particular student pointed out, it's sad that this had to be part of the case study. Why weren't people already asking these questions? And so I told her that her statement piqued my interest. And I asked, what questions would you start with to design a study into this aspect? And finally, a question for evidence and reasoning. So this particular student gave some really good insights, and she mentioned that she would need to keep her own bias in check when she was working on her project because it's an issue that she's very close to. She chose to work on her project with someone from work, and she is impacted by that particular experience at work. So she needs to sort of remove herself and maintain a non-biased opinion as she goes forward in the analysis for her project. So I just simply want to ask, she said she needs to do that, keep it in check. So I'm asking her, what strategies will you use to ensure you're not being led by your assumptions, to kind of prompt her down that road a little bit more rather than just saying she needs to do it? Well, how will you do that? So an overview of the strategies today, I've offered 5 recommendations from the author of the blog that I shared. And then from Positive Psychology, I offered their chart with the question types, the Socratic questions. So hopefully you found this helpful today. And I would love to know if you could just reach out and let me know, what was your biggest takeaway from today's webinar? What will you start doing, stop doing, or keep doing that will help within discussion forums in your class? Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. As always, if you need assistance with teaching tasks or anything else, visit our website.